welcome to Sober City. My name is Seth, and I'm an alcoholic. Apologies for the delay getting this episode out a day later than I was hoping. I was fortunate enough to get out of town and have a little sober fun down in Salt Lake City, Utah, and did some snowboarding with a good friend of mine. And as a result, just late getting this out, actually recording this intro at the airport. Excited for you to hear Caleb's story. Honest and sincere, and has had quite a few years of sobriety. So truly a respectable individual. Pretty grateful for him. So once again, thanks for listening. With all that said, life is beautiful. Sobriety is worth it. Thank God for today. This is Sober City. Caleb, welcome to Sober City.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure to have you, buddy. How long have you been sober?
I have been sober since December 4th of 2020.
It's a lot of not drinking.
Yeah, it has been. Some been easier at times than others, but keep on doing one day at a time and you get to where I'm at, get to where all the old timers are at with their 30-some years.
And what were you like before you got sober?
Oh, man. So I started drinking when I was about 14 years old. Never really felt like I fit in. I was born with a handicapped sister, and for a long time, I didn't want people kind of in my personal bubble because I didn't want people judging me. I didn't want people coming over to my house. All my interactions with my friends were really limited. I'd only go over to other people's houses. Basically, I always kind of felt like the odd man out because of it. I also lived outside of town. All my friends lived in town. They got the boyhood experiences of riding their bikes around the neighborhoods. I didn't really have that. I was kind of on an island. Childhood was pretty normal. Nothing real traumatic happened, Got to high school, was doing sports. Started hanging out with kind of some of the kids that were in that scene and started going to some parties. Remember the first night I ever drank, I immediately had that relief. No longer was I thinking about how you perceived me and how I was acting. All of a sudden I was cool, calm, and collected, which is something that I'd wanted my whole life. When I was sober, I was just riddled with the what ifs, the anxiety, and I had no self-esteem. As I started going through high school, started having some mental health issues. I got really depressed like my junior year of high school, started experimenting with drugs, started with weed. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was pretty much smoking every weekend, gotten enough connections with older kids, college kids that, I could keep a steady supply of alcohol with me. And generally when I would get to my school, the first thing I would do is I would pour like half of a 750 into a blender bottle and take it into school with me. And I did that for about a year.
You had said that in high school or growing up, you weren't very comfortable having friends over.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that?
So I have a handicapped sister.
You mentioned that. I wasn't sure if that was why.
Pretty much,
Okay.
I always felt out of sorts, and I'm not even going to say that it was because of her. At the time, though, I think that's what I attributed it to. But I think really what it was is just already at that age, my alcoholism was kicking in. And I was already just starting to be, irritable, discontent, maladjusted to what normal is. I felt like you were judging me for anything you possibly could be. And having a handicapped sister was something pretty easy to just kind of use as that point of this is what it's got to be.
So it was just, the shame of, your sister and That did not help with the fact that you were already insecure, struggling with insecurity.
And then I kind of had like my first like coming to Jesus moment with drinking. I was cliff diving with some of my friends. I fell, cracked my head open, came to in the back of a car. Somehow we gotten back to Rapid, went to the ER, and the doctor told me, that I was an alcoholic and that normal people didn't drink like this. And I was like, whatever, lady, I'm 18 and I'm just having fun.
The doctor said you're an alcoholic.
Oh, yeah.
And was it just because you were so intoxicated, or what would give them reason?
Hindsight 2020, I'm not sure if it's because my blood alcohol level was double what the legal limit was, or if it was her history questionnaire, me being honest, because that was something that I did my whole life, was I used honesty as a weapon. I always kind of wanted the shock and awe factor. I enjoyed telling her, yeah, I've been drinking like this since I was 14 years old, because I thought it was cool at the time. But all she thought was that I had a dependency on alcohol. At this point, I was working. I'd started working the job that I had the first couple years out of high school. They'd put me in charge of a crew after me only doing it for 2 years. Decided that, I kind of wanted to go to college. I was kind of overdoing construction after a couple years. Moved up to Spearfish, went to school there for a little bit. Started dating this girl. Ended up, things didn't work out. I was really boozing pretty hard. So I moved back to Rapid, dropped out after that semester. Was trying to still figure out what I was going to do. Ended up going back to construction. Started dating another girl, and that relationship ended really badly too. And I think compounding those two failed relationships on top of each other kind of really took me down, just on an overall downward spiral. I mean, I got really depressed again. I started experimenting with other drugs. I started hanging out with kind of worse and worse individuals. My circle of friends kept on changing, but every new group of friends that I would get were a worse group of people to associate yourself with. Eventually, after doing that for, a little over a year, got to a point where I was basically just afraid for my life. I'd gotten involved in some pretty bad stuff, and some people were pretty mad about it. And so I started looking for work outside of the state. I got a job mining in Wyoming, and I left. And when I got there, I've changed states, I've changed careers. It was a really good opportunity, and it was an amazing opportunity. There's not a lot of careers out there where you can pay all of your cost of living and all your bills with half your income and have half your income for just funsies. And I stayed there for a couple of years. I was able to kind of keep on the up and up. But then once I started kind of going out and drinking with the guys that are on my crew, I started to really get into binge drinking, because I had a split schedule where I could go to work for 4 days, and then I would generally either have 3 days off or a whole week off. And when I would have these big breaks of time, I would tie one on for 3-4 days straight, and generally Friday, Saturday, I was at the bar. Sunday, I'd be drinking at home, and then, go back and start it all over again. And I was just having fun, and it was still fun. I was still kind of living this lie that everything was cool. But I was so blind to the fact how alcohol was already controlling my life, because fitness was a huge passion of mine that I developed through high school and right out of high school. And when I turned 21, I basically completely quit going to the gym. And from 21 to 24, I went from 215 to 340 pounds just by sitting in a bar and boozing. And I still thought, my life's not all that bad. Well, my circle that I'm hanging out with keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually I get back into a situation where I'm hanging out with some people that I shouldn't be. And I end up getting arrested, and I'm looking at doing like 30 years in prison at 22. It was a bunch of BS. It was literally just a couple individuals that are mad at me that went and lied to the police. I was in a very small town. Her dad and his dad were known by pretty much everybody in the town. And it was just kind of their word versus mine. And the cops didn't do any type of detective work or anything. They literally came and got me, pulled me over as I was leaving my house, took me to jail, took my statement, stepped out of the room for 5 minutes, must have called the prosecuting attorney or whoever decides what you can get rung up with on charges, came back in, read me my rights, told me everything I was being arrested for, took me down to the Meade County Jail. And then I started basically a 13-month legal battle where I developed a huge resentment towards law enforcement. Everything in these individuals' story was fabricated to the point where they said that I was at a bar that I hadn't been at for weeks. And my attorney would subpoena them for the CCTV footage at the bar. They would send us a blank disc. We'd ask for it again. They'd send us corrupted data in a PDF file. I mean, and just went on and on and on. And the whole time I was sitting on bond and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go anywhere. You know, you can't leave the county that you're arraigned in. So, you know, I literally went from home to work and back to work and back home. And that's when, you know, it quit being fun. And I was just drinking out of necessity to just kind of numb the amount of bullshit that I was going through. And my attorney at the time, who had quit drinking many decades before I met him, advised me, you know, you should probably go do an intake. You should probably go to treatment. You need to quit drinking. You need to clean up your image. And I was like, nah, man, I'm good. Get through the whole process. Charges end up getting dropped.
What were your charges? You were looking at 30 years?
No.
And you said they were just false accusations?
Yeah, like they accused me of kidnapping somebody, which is pretty hard to do when you're in a different city and state. They said that I had done all this on a Friday, and I was in Rapid from Friday to Sunday that weekend. But kind of dragged things out, grasped at straws until they basically ran out of opportunities.
And so ultimately, all charges were dismissed?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when the prosecuting attorney comes out and just starts talking to you like you're a normal human being on the bench and says, I think it's time we wrap this up. And not even 2 months after my charges got dropped, I got a DUI back here in Rapid. Walked back into my attorney's office, told him, hey, man, I just picked up more charges, this time in Rapid. They told me, well, here's the deal. You got to go to treatment even if you want us to represent you at this point. And it's going to cost X amount of dollars for us to do it. So I ended up going and getting into the Road, which is an outpatient treatment in Rapid City, and had very, very minor interest in actually getting sober. I thought, you know, things got way out of hand. It was a crappy time in your life and you quit drinking for a year. You'll be fine to go back to it. And so, you know, I drank a little bit of beer a couple of times while I was in treatment, didn't really go crazy. Ended up having to go to one AA meeting a week, though, while I was in there. And that period of my life, you know, I still wasn't really interested in taking any course for a solution in my life. And ended up getting about I don't know, 6-7 months working with a mentor. And part of my mentorship program was that, you know, I needed to work on my resentments. And I was a very hate-filled person, especially after what had transpired with the police and the judicial system. So I had no interest in doing that. I didn't want to take a look at anything that I had ever done, you know, as far as I was concerned, the way things that had panned out. You know, if something bad happened to you and something bad happened to me, that was equal. And I didn't need to look at that situation again. Well, I ended up taking a job, working construction on the road. I was dating another girl at this time that was also pretty heavily into drinking. And I was able to kind of white knuckle it for another 3-4 months. She tried killing herself right in front of me. I did not handle that very good. The neighbors had come over during all the commotion, and the husband asked me if I wanted to drink, and I said, sure. First time back on the bottle after like 7 months ended up with me literally passing out at this dude's countertop that I'd never met before. After that, it was pretty much hell on earth. I'd get like 50 days and I'd just start drinking again. I remember my mom asked me, please just be sober for your birthday. And I think I got like 100 days that time. And then I went back out. And I remember just the mental insanity because there was this gas station I had to go by when I was going home and they had liquor in there. I can't even tell you how many times I'd be like, I'm not going to stop there. And all of a sudden I'm sitting in the parking lot with a sixer. It's like, where did my resolve go? 5 minutes ago, I was never going to drink again. Here I am going home with a bottle. And it was getting towards the end of December. I started having some pretty bad blackouts. had been a blackout drinker before. It wasn't a every time thing, but due to some of my miscellaneous drug use, I developed a pretty high tolerance for alcohol because when you're taking stuff that keeps you up for a couple days at a time, you can keep on drinking like it doesn't even bother you. So when you quit using those substances, your alcohol tolerance is still insane. Your brain checks out and you black out, but you don't stop rolling. There was a blackout I came out of. I'd started drinking at 10 a.m. that morning. The last thing I remember was about 4 in the afternoon. And then when I came out of this blackout, I was running barefoot down a street at like 2 in the morning. I had no idea what had happened. Came out of another blackout after that, and I was just sitting on top of this dude, just smashing his head into the asphalt. No idea what he even did to justify something like that. I knew the way that my life was going, I was probably going to go to prison for hurting somebody because I was just rapidly spiraling out of control. And so, that course of violence kept on going. And one day I woke up and my buddy that I had drank with for the very first time ever when I was like 14 called me. And I'd reached out to him the night before and I didn't even remember it. And I mean, me and this guy, we'd been friends since second grade. And we'd done everything together. I mean, we were on a tear for the better part of a decade. And had gone through some pretty rough periods of our lives together. He had a year sober. And he was the guy that I always pointed at and was like, well, I'm not like him, so I don't have a problem. If I ever get that bad, I'll stop. And we'd kind of disconnected because I kept on relapsing. And he had managed to find something that worked for him. And he went and sat me down and started talking to me about, what was going on in my life and why I was doing the things that I was doing. I realized at that moment in time, I was like, man, if this guy can get sober, clearly I missed something. Because he was way worse off a year ago than I am, or so I thought. And so I ended up contacting my mentor again and started working with him. And I got back to working on my resentments, and I realized that I needed to just go ahead and own up to my part to play in things. Started working on, kind of righting my wrongs, all the people in my life that I'd needed to go and apologize to. But, about 2.5 years into working with him, I was still pretty much just as crazy as I was when I got sober. I was introduced to a motorcycle club called the Hombres MC. And They were as described to me, clean and sober outlaw motorcycle club. And as somebody who was very jaded at the time, the idea of being involved with something like that while getting to also be around guys that are sober really appealed to me, like sucked me in. And I was really grateful for that. It gave me a place to belong to, because a lot of people that have a drinking problem, we don't ever feel like we belong anywhere. And when I got sober and the other guys I was meeting that were sober were 10, 20, 30 years older than me, I felt like I'd missed the boat. And so I found a home with those guys. But 2.5 years into not really progressing as a person, I ended up getting a different mentorship, a spiritual mentorship. And my current mentor, he has taught me so much more in the last going on 2 years about how to walk and talk with God, how to listen to him. When I got here, I would pray, but I never had anyone explain to me that when you pray, you have to follow it up with meditation, because a conversation can't just be one way. You have to have the portion where you speak, and then you have to have the portion where you listen. And that reliance on a higher power is what keeps me going.
How far into sobriety was it when you got hooked up with your motorcycle club?
Day like 14. My original mentor was invested in them, asked me if I wanted to check it out. I met those guys. Some of them are pretty well-adjusted human beings. Some of them were pretty wild. But the guys that I met that day were guys that were young, all the way up into their early 60s. And there was a lot of history there and a lot of pride and just a machismo that just instantly pulled me in, because I needed that for my image, because I knew who I was as a human being, but I didn't know how to drop off this set of armor that I'd built up over the years. Every interaction that I had was very aggressive, in your face. If we didn't hit it off right off the bat, I didn't like you for no reason other than just we didn't click right off the bat. And I was very antagonistic. I'd yell at people. I threw shovels at people. And those were my type of guys, easily assimilate into that lifestyle and be around people that are sober rather than being around those type of people that are just drunk and using all the time.
The importance of community in early sobriety is huge.
100%.
So to be able to have that and incorporate something you enjoy, and to be able to enjoy it sober with other people, that normalized being sober. With you being in that realm of manual labor, right? I think that's one thing that's tough, is you're self-employed now, but within the blue collar community, it seems like alcohol use and abuse is prevalent.
Oh, it's insane. I was working up by the North Dakota border and watched guys beat the brakes off each other, and then one dude pull a pistol out. And I've seen guys that are strung out on meth back an excavator inside of a foundation, guys that are hungover showing up to work making bad mistakes, hurting other people. It's a culture of alcoholism and drug use just through and through. I don't care what anybody has to say about it.
You being where you're at now, you probably wouldn't have an issue working alongside that now, right?
I didn't have an issue working alongside it when I got sober either. By the time I decided to quit drinking, I was so entirely disgusted with myself, my actions, and my drinking that I remember having 2 weeks sober, sitting there with my buddy that's drinking a beer, and just even the thought of taking a sip of it just made my stomach turn sour. And I was blessed in that way. Once I finally got the gift of desperation to get my stuff together, I had no interest in alcohol from that point on. I have had cravings, but it wasn't for alcohol. I worked a lot of hours at different jobs that I've had, and sometimes a craving for a little boost would come along. Even I don't think I had a craving for any of that after I had a year.
When you say boost, are you referring to alcohol or are you talking about a stimulant?
Cocaine and amphetamines.
Yeah, okay. Any desire for alcohol has been pretty much removed.
Just from the get-go. I haven't wanted to drink since day like 1.
Like you said, the gift of desperation, it is a gift when you get to that point where you see alcohol and all it looks like is work and misery. It stops looking like a reprieve.
It quit looking like a reprieve probably 2 years before I actually quit drinking. I just didn't have a solution for life other than that bottle at that point. And it was becoming an increasingly poor solution. I think that's when that desperation starts getting kicked up. When you realize the only thing that's worked for the last 10 years of your life isn't going to do it for you anymore.
If you could say something to maybe those guys that you worked with in North Dakota, if there's somebody out there that with calloused hands feels like drinking is just part of what comes with that line of work.
There's a lot of people that I met in the trades that I've been in that were heavy drinkers. I mean, we partied hard together. And even at a point, those guys came up to me and said, "Hey, man, enough is enough. Like, you got to stop doing this. Like, we're worried you're going to kill us, kill somebody, kill yourself." I was a chronic drunk driver, and they'd get super mad at me because I'd blitz out the back of the bar at the last call, run across the railroad tracks to the gas station, buy a case of beer, throw it in my truck, and take off. That was my go-to Irish goodbye. And there is a lot of drinking in that culture, but at the end of the day, when you have people that care about you, that can see that's a problem, nobody is bigger or tougher than alcoholism. Alcoholism brought me to my knees. Alcoholism brought most of my family to their knees. I have seen alcoholism completely strip people of everything that they have. If you or somebody that you know has a problem with alcoholism, there's nothing that you can do until you actively invest in finding a solution for your problem. Nobody can just grit their teeth through it. I know people that are currently doing that are just mad at the world, spinning their tires 24/7, can't figure out which way to go. And they literally are going to probably die young. And I hate to say that because I care about them. But the stress of just choosing to either white knuckle or live in an active addiction is so great on your body. The mental and physical toll is not anything that I would personally want to deal with. And watching somebody that I know and care about deal with it every single day is awful. And that individual is probably never going to come to terms with the fact that they have a problem and that there is a solution out there. And I've offered to them to come and hang out with me and my buddies and walk the road that I'm on, and they've turned me down on that. But if someone comes up to you and tells you that you've got a problem, it's probably worth actually checking out. Don't be as dumb as me, and from a very young age, hearing that I have a problem with drinking, continuing to just totally disregard those people. Because I was told that I have a drinking problem since I was like not even drinking yet. My dad telling me, "Hey man, there are generations of our family members that have a drinking problem. If you choose to drink, there is a very high likelihood that you are going to develop alcoholism." My great grandfather was a horrible drunk. My grandfather wasn't a drunk because he just chose to abstain from alcohol entirely for his whole life. He didn't even want to risk it. I rolled the dice. I lost. Generationally speaking, I can take it all the way back to my great grandfather, who would go into town from the ranch and sit on a bar stool for 3 days and just get wicked drunk, which back then they just call it a bender, but he'd stay off of it for months at a time too. When you don't have hooch out on the prairie on your ranch, it's pretty easy to stay dry, but as soon as he'd go to town for anything, good luck pulling him off that bar stool till he was out of money. And I can kind of relate to that because that's how I drank for a long time, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was just party time until I had to go back to work and dry out.
Like you said, that job allowed you to have those benders because you work 4 days, 3 days off,
Mm-hmm.
and during those 3 days, just not productive.
No.
And like you said too, you were making pretty good money. And one thing that's pretty dangerous to an alcoholic is a lot of liquid cash.
Oh, yeah. I got a lot of really cool tattoos during that time period of my life. But, maybe if I would have looked into doing something about what was actively going on in my life when I was 18, I wouldn't have burned my life down so many times. I believe that a higher power, God, really does insert himself into your life at key pivotal moments. Right when I got my different mentor, my whole life went on a really crazy journey. My wife had my first daughter who wasn't planned. 9 months after she was born, found out she was pregnant again.
How did you meet your wife?
So we actually knew each other since middle school, but we reconnected on just a dating app. And that's just a whole nother blessing that I got. Because when we started dating, I told her, hey, I'm sober and this is how I roll. And she's like, all right, I'm cool with that. And her sobriety date is the first day that we went on a date together. She hasn't drank since then.
Is your wife an alcoholic?
No, she just has respect for me and my life choices and wants to live kind of in the same way. I was working somewhere that was incredibly dangerous and a horrible situation to be at, and ended up leaving that, starting my own business, and just the multitudes of stress that I was under. I don't know if I could have stayed sober without that relationship with my God. I would have been able to walk through some of the things I did go through as gracefully as I have. Getting into where I'm at today is just, I'm in a holding pattern, but it's not bad to be in a rut. I used to always think being in a rut was a negative thing to be in, but being able to be content with a rhythm and a pattern is a good spot to be at in life. I get up, I go to the gym, I've refound my passion for fitness. I go home, I get to spend time with my wife for a half an hour before the kids get up. I get to take my daughters to daycare. I go to work. I'm able to be present, engaged with what I'm doing. My business is very rewarding. I get to enjoy multiple different careers at the same moment. I get to be a salesman. I get to be an architect. I get to be on the ground actually doing the hands-on installation. And I get to create cool outdoor entertainment areas all the time. And that's a really fun career to be in. And then when I go home, I don't have any regrets. I can go to bed, wake up the next day not feeling like who's going to see me? What do I owe someone? What does someone owe me? Those just negative thoughts. I don't have to live like that anymore. A pretty good spot to be at.
I don't know if you mentioned what ended up happening with that DUI.
I got a DUI. That's what happened with my DUI.
What was the consequence for that?
Oh, suspended my license for I think it was like 90 days and SR22 for 3 years.
Did you have a CDL when you got that DUI?
Got my CDL after the fact.
And how did you get that DUI?
Well, I had started drinking that day in Hewlett, Wyoming, and I made it to Box Elder, South Dakota. And I was enjoying the nice gentleman club that they have out there when I decided that it wasn't worth my money. So I decided to leave. And me being the brightest bulb in the pack, walked up to the bar, ordered, I think it was like 2 or 3 beers and like 2 or 3 shots. And the lady asked me if I needed a tray. And I said nope and drank them all right in front of her and then walked out the door. And just mysteriously, somehow I ended up getting pulled over by a highway patrol officer as soon as I got off the exit or the on-ramp. And yeah, had me dead to rights.
Your friend that is sober but not working a program or solution, they probably think they're doing all right because they're sober.
I think just from what I've witnessed, because I'm obviously not a mind reader, that they're so wrapped up in what the possibility of a solution may be, they can't even comprehend actually putting action into one. Because that's what I've noticed. The mental compulsion to just overthink everything, I'm the center of attention. Everything revolves around me. If I do this, this is going to happen. If I do that, this is going to happen. And they don't. And I think that's why I said it's going to kill them eventually, is because if you sit there and stress about every single possible possibility in your life that could happen, instead of just waking up, telling God, laying it all out on the table, what you got on your plate, asking for strength, meditating on what you're asking for and going about your day, my head is empty. I'm just actively taking a role in what I'm doing right now. But when you don't have a solution, you're on that hamster wheel 24/7 of overthinking everything. The stress, the anxiety, the depression. It eventually takes its toll.
Some people think as long as I don't drink, I'll be okay. But in reality, just not drinking isn't going to really help you as much as you think it would.
Putting a plug in the jug doesn't solve anything. My problems weren't drinking problems. Drinking was my solution for my problems. You put the bottle down and you don't do anything about what's going on inside your head, it's not going to fix a damn thing. And you can try and mask that. I see people do that all the time. I got a buddy who's got a drinking problem. He knows he's got a drinking problem. And he changes hobbies about every 6 months. And that's how he tries to manage it. But you can tell when he's having a bad day because he's just all spun out. Can't get actually anything done because it's just mental obsessions kicked back in. But he tries to distract himself by getting into something different for another 6 months. And it works for a little bit. I've seen him get a year. I've seen him get a year and a half, but he always ends up going back to drinking. And as far as I'm concerned, getting a year or a year and a half is a pretty good stretch of time. You might get a good stretch. The next one's going to be shorter, and the next one's going to be shorter, and the next one's going to be shorter. And that's what happens every time.
A progressive disease.
100%. My last relapse, where I gave up on being sober for a while, I was right back to where I was at when I was drinking hard 6 months prior to that. The same thing when I moved to Wyoming and I took a good block of time off away from drinking and using. It only just came back weeks. The first time I'd drink, I'd have 2 beers and I'd be just mentally obsessing about why, I want that third beer, that fifth, sixth, eighth, but I can't have it because I'm doing controlled drinking. Everybody here's watching me. They want to see how I'm going to act. And as soon as I'd leave wherever I was at, immediately I was pulling into a gas station to buy 2-3 tall boys and a pack of smokes because that could hold me over. At least by the time I drank all that, I'd have a buzz and I'd be able to take that deep breath and just kind of relax.
If you relapse or you break a long stretch of sobriety, it doesn't take long, or it's almost immediately, you end up right where you left off. It's not a slow fade. You go back to how you were when you stopped. There's always those times where we take a break and then we convince ourselves that we'll drink like gentlemen.
I got sober when I was 24, and I wish I would have gotten sober when I was 18. When I got sober, I thought I had missed the boat. I think I mentioned that earlier about how, everybody that was older than me, and I had done so much in my drinking and using that I thought I was a goner because everybody else's rock bottoms, as they put them, were what I thought was just trivial stuff that I was doing when I was 16. And when I came into sobriety, I would judge those people because I was like, I had so much of my image wrapped up in me being big, bad, and tough that I judged people who had a soft bottom, as I would call it. Oh, you drove drunk one time and you decided to get sober? That's weak. Well, I wish I would have been that way. I'm grateful for those people and I'm happy for them. Any person that chooses to turn away from alcoholism and drug use to get their life together, I hope it's the just smallest trivial thing in the world that makes you think, maybe I do have a problem and maybe I should go get help. You don't want to be like me or some of my other buddies. I have friends that were incarcerated for decades of their life because they never could ever come to terms with their problems. I was lucky enough where I had a couple of close calls and I had a few bad enough things happen to me where it shook me up and woke me up to the reality of things. But if I could have just realized when I was 18 years old that, hey man, normal people don't drink the way that I drink, I can only imagine where my life would be at today instead of wasting another 6 years of my life just chasing a bottle.
How old are you?
I'm going to be 29 in September.
You're 29 and you just celebrated 4 years in December.
Mm-hmm.
I was 36 when I got sober. I had so many points in my life where I knew I had a problem, but I was constantly trying to convince myself that I didn't because I wasn't that bad. I haven't gotten a DUI or I haven't really been arrested. And like you said, soft bottoms, you called them. And the soft bottom is somebody that hits not necessarily what some would consider rock bottom. I think I would classify myself as a soft bottom. I was getting close to making it rock, but I hadn't lost my marriage or my house or my car or my business. And I'm grateful for that. But even then, I was going into sobriety with the mindset that I don't think I really have a problem because I still have these things. So I still have some control. I have some manageability. Waiting until those not yets happen is not a good plan because those not yets eventually will happen. And a lot of times those are worse than what you anticipate and they come faster than you think. And once they happen, they happen. And it's really tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
The scariest part for me when I decided to come back to working with my mentor was my morality was just eroding away. I was doing things that I said I would never do, hooking up with girls that had boyfriends and just being an overall scumbag. And when you lose your moral compass, I'm very, very close to just being okay with losing it all. When you lose the things that make you who you are, you're just one step away from not even caring if you lose your life.
And in a lot of ways, we know we're worse than what other people perceive. We try to maintain a public persona. But when we go to bed at night, we're just riddled with that guilt, shame, and remorse.
Gee, I wish I would have been like that. I wanted everyone to know, and I had to go and make amends to like my mom because I wanted her to know exactly what I was doing. There was one time I remember I walked through her door and she said I smelled like alcohol. And I was like, well, that's what happens when you stay up all night drinking tequila and snorting coke. Why did I say that? Something like that to my mother? I wish I would have been more concerned with keeping things wrapped up, but there was just so much pain and anger inside of me when I was younger. I was putting all of it out there for everyone else. I wanted you to hurt as bad as I was hurting. And it didn't matter who it was. Guys could get it physically and verbally. I had 3 younger sisters, never ever would raise my hand against a woman, but there was several ex-girlfriends that I had that I talked to horribly and I didn't even think about it, offhand remarks about the way they looked or how they did their makeup or whatever, and just had no even regard for how they felt because I felt horrible inside. You might as well too.
It just seems not fair that we could be so unhappy and other people could be. Caleb, I sure appreciate you, man. Thank you for hanging out with me and talking with me. Appreciate you always being available. One thing I like about you is you don't censor yourself and you're blunt and bold in a way that helped me. And you've certainly said things to me that had made me really look at myself in a different way. So appreciate that about you and congrats on 4 years.
Thank you.